The first sound I heard in Dante Salvator's world was not shouting. It was the soft, dry click of beads. I did not see him at first. I saw polished black shoes, a still line of men in dark suits. The edge of the marble floor was so bright it caught the chandelier like ice. Then the hand at my arm tightened, and I stumbled hard enough that tears, already burning in my eyes, finally spilled. I said I wasn't stealing it, I told the security guard dragging me toward the service exit. My voice came out thin with humiliation. It's mine, or it was my mother's. The page belongs to whoever paid for this floor, he said. Another hand caught my other wrist. I twisted, not because I thought I could get free, but because I could not bear the feeling of being carried like luggage through a room full of people pretending not to stare. The charity gala still hummed behind us. Violins, low laughter, crystal touching crystal, while I was hauled past an arrangement of white lilies tall enough to hide a body. I hated that thought the second it crossed my mind. Men like this probably had bodies to hide. She gave a fake name at the desk, one of them called ahead. Says she's with Bell Restoration, but there's no badge on file. I lost the badge when your man grabbed me. She also had this. The first guard lifted my satchel like evidence. My stomach dropped. The leather flap hung open. Inside, wrapped in acid-free tissue, was the blackened corner of a parish ledger page my mother had died trying to protect. I lunged for it. A forearm barred my chest so fast I lost breath. That was when I saw him. He stood near the ballroom threshold with one hand in his pocket and the other moving over black rosary beads. Not praying. Counting, maybe. Measuring. He was taller than everyone around him by less than an inch, but the room had arranged itself around him anyway. Men who looked capable of breaking bone glanced at him before they breathed. His charcoal suit fit like something cut on the understanding that he would never need to rush. Dark hair, hard mouth. A stillness colder than the marble under my shoes. I knew who he was before someone whispered, "Boss, Dante Salvator." The name moved through New York like a sealed envelope. Everyone knew it existed. Few people wanted to know what was inside. He looked at the satchel, then at me. "Name," he said. I should have lied again. I had used Sierra Bell for 3 years without trouble. My father would have wanted it. My old landlord had wanted it. The funeral home had even wanted it, when my mother's headstone paperwork was processed wrong, and I stood there at 19, hands shaking, forcing a clerk to put Belandi back where it belonged. But there are moments when lying feels like a second death. The guard answered for me. "Sierra Bell." I swallowed blood where I had bitten my lip and lifted my head. "My name," I said with both men still holding me, "is Serafina Belandi." The beads stopped. I felt it before I understood it. The air changed, not warmer, sharper. Dante's gaze lifted fully to mine. It was not kindness. It was not shock either. It was recognition dragged over old damage. "Let her go," he said. The hands vanished from my arms so quickly I nearly fell. I caught myself with a palm against the wall. My chest hurt from breathing too fast. The room stayed silent. Dante crossed the marble without hurry. Up close, he smelled expensive and cold, cedar layered over night air. There was a faint white line at the base of his throat, just visible above his collar, and another at his jaw, both old enough to have settled into him. He stopped a foot away and looked at the tear tracks on my face as if they offended him less than the fingerprints already darkening my skin. "Say it again." I should have hated how easily I obeyed. "Serafina Belandi." His thumb slid once over the bead nearest his knuckle. Click. "Who was your mother?" The question hit so directly my mouth parted before I could defend myself. "Elena Belandi." He went very still, not the ordinary stillness I had already seen. This was something else, like a blade put flat on a table after it had done what it came to do. Behind him, one man muttered a curse under his breath. Dante took my satchel from the guard and handed it to me himself. "You came here with burned church property in your bag and expected what exactly?" The truth came out because humiliation had already stripped me of the energy to shape it prettier. I expected rich men to buy my mother's dead work and hang it under better lighting. One eyebrow moved, very slightly. A guard shifted, scandalized. I realized then that I had probably just insulted half the ballroom and the man currently deciding whether I kept breathing indoors. Dante's eyes dropped to the tissue wrapping in my satchel. And instead your men put their hands on me. His gaze returned to my face. You cried. Heat flooded my cheeks. I'm aware, but you still corrected the name. I did not know why that mattered to him. I did not know why his voice had lowered on that sentence, or why the men around him looked as if I had just stepped on ground wired with something explosive. My mother used to say, I said, hating how unsteady my voice sounded, if people can take your name, they can take the rest in installments. Something unreadable passed over his face. Then he looked at the nearest guard. If any man in this house touches her like that again, he leaves with fewer fingers than he arrived with. No one argued. I stared at him. I did not feel safe. That would have been insane, but I felt the axis of the night shift under me. Dante looked back at me. Come upstairs, little saint. I'm not a saint. No, his eyes flicked once to my satchel. But you walked into a Salvator Gala carrying fire. Close enough. I'm not going anywhere with you. You already did. He glanced at the elevator doors behind him. You just haven't understood it yet. He turned and started walking, certain enough of obedience that he did not check whether I followed. I should have run. Instead, I stood there with my dead mother's page in my hands, the shape of his command still in the air, and understood with a cold, sick clarity that the evening I had called normal was already gone. The elevator opened. The doors closed behind me. The guest room was larger than the apartment I had shared with my father after we lost the house. That was the first offensive thing about it. The second was how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, curated quiet. Thick drapes, cream walls, antique walnut desk, bed spread in gray linen so smooth it looked untouched by any human body. A silver tray sat on a low table with water, aspirin, and a small plate of sliced pears I had not asked for. Somewhere beyond the windows, Manhattan traffic breathed against the glass. Inside, there was only the muted hum of controlled air and the pulse in my bruised wrists. I stood in the middle of the room with my satchel still over my shoulder and wondered whether refusing to sit counted as resistance. A knock sounded once. Not waiting for an answer, a woman entered carrying a first aid kit. She was in her 60s, solidly built, hair braided and pinned in a crown. She wore a black dress under a white apron and the expression of someone who had seen enough bad behavior from men to stop being impressed by it decades ago. Sit down, she said. I'd rather stand. That was not an invitation. She set the kit on the desk. I'm Maria, I sat. Good, you bleed like a dramatic person. I looked down. The split in my lip had marked the front of my blouse. I'm fine. Girls who say that usually faint in 10 minutes. Tilt your chin. She dabbed antiseptic against my mouth. It stung hard enough to make my eyes water again, which I resented on principle. What did you do downstairs? Told the truth badly. Maria made a sound that might have been approval. That happens here. Is he keeping me prisoner? She considered me while snapping open a bandage packet. If he were, the room would have fewer windows and more locks. That's not comforting. It wasn't meant to be. I watched her tape gauze over the worst bruise at my wrist. Do you work for him? I cook for him, which is more useful than fear most days. She patted my hand once, unexpectedly gentle. Eat the pears. Shock makes women foolish. When she left, the room felt too large again. I did eat one pear slice. Hunger betrayed me. Then I crossed to the desk and unwrapped the burned ledger fragment with careful fingers. The page smelled faintly of smoke even after all these years. My mother had hidden it inside the lining of a hymn case before she died, and I had found it at 20 in a box of winter coats my father never opened. The visible ink was nearly gone, just a date. Half a seal, 3 letters of a surname. Sal, a knock sounded. This time the man who entered did wait half a second, though not long enough to matter. He was broad-shouldered, graying at the temples, with the kind of face that had once been handsome and chosen usefulness instead. He shut the door behind him and remained there, hands clasped in front of him. Enzo de Santis, he said, Security, I almost laughed. That's rich. One side of his mouth moved. Not my finest night. Your men bruised me. My men are learning. His gaze dropped to the ledger fragment, then back to me. You should know something. The boss did not bring you up here because he's soft. I looked at him properly then. There was no threat in his voice. Only the tiredness of a man who had delivered warnings before and watched people ignore them. I didn't assume softness. Good, he nodded once. Assume attention. It's more dangerous. Why did my name matter? That's not my story. He opened the door, then paused. If I were you, I wouldn't try the elevator. The stairwell is alarmed. He left before I could tell whether that had been advice or a test. An hour later, I learned it was both. I made it to the hallway with my satchel and one shoe in my hand before a young man nearly collided with me while balancing 2 glass bottles of imported mineral water against his chest. He yelped, I swore, and one bottle went spinning. I caught it on instinct before it shattered. He stared at the bottle in my hand as if I had performed surgery. Well, he said, pressing a palm to his heart, at least one of us has coordination. Put your shoe on before Enzo sees you hobbling like a Victorian ghost. He was maybe 30, narrow-faced, expensively dressed, and wearing the pained expression of a man, enduring an invisible injustice. I'm leaving, I said. Of course you are. He shifted the remaining bottle. So am I emotionally every day, I blinked, he sighed. Paolo Rizzi, logistics, driver. Reluctant witness to bad decisions. Yours mostly this evening. I should have moved around him. Instead I said, do you always introduce yourself like a man narrating his own funeral? Only when Maria has put me on steamed fish again. He looked past me toward the room. Did she feed you pears? Yes, of course she did. She loves strays and punishes me for existing. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. If I disappear, tell the police I was murdered by unsalted zucchini. Despite everything, despite the bruise on my wrist, the man waiting somewhere in this hotel with my name in his head. The fact that I was barefoot in a corridor I should never have entered. I laughed. Paolo placed a hand over his chest. There, finally, a miracle, the house needed one. A shadow lengthened across the carpet. We both turned. Dante stood at the far end of the hall, one hand in his pocket, rosary beads dark against the other. He had removed his jacket. The white shirt beneath was rolled once at the forearms. Somehow that looked more dangerous than the suit. Paolo straightened so fast I heard his spine object. I was returning her to captivity, he said. Dante's gaze settled on my bare foot, then the shoe in my hand. Were you? I prefer escorting her toward poor judgment. Go drink your expensive water, Paolo. With pleasure. It tastes like regret. He slipped away, muttering about sodium and doomed men. Dante came closer. The carpet softened his steps, but not the feeling of impact when he stopped in front of me. You tried the hallway. I thought the room might have been a misunderstanding. It was. His eyes dropped to the satchel, then rose again. You came to confront me in public with stolen church records. That earns a conversation, not freedom. I didn't come to confront you. I came to stop a sale. Same shape. Different dress. I tightened my grip on the shoe. You don't get to decide where I go. No, his voice stayed quiet. Then let me put it another way. Until I know why Alina Belandi's daughter walked into my ballroom carrying a burned ledger page, you leave when I say. He held my gaze until speaking felt like the weaker move. Then he stepped aside and opened the bedroom door himself. That, somehow, felt even more like control. Inside, little saint. I hated the name for how quickly my body recognized it when he said it. I went in. The lock turned after me, softly, decisively, and that was worse. Mourning at the Salvetor estate did not begin with birds. It began with gates. I heard the metal grind first, heavy and deliberate, somewhere far below the hill. Then tires on gravel. Then silence again, that peculiar, strained silence of armed men pretending not to be armed. When I pushed the curtains back, the Hudson lay gray beyond the winter trees, and the house rose around me in pale stone and old money, too beautiful to be honest. They had moved me overnight. There was a dress laid across the chaise in the corner, cream wool, long sleeves, indecently soft. Beside it sat a folded note in blunt, dark handwriting. Breakfast. Library at 9. Bring the page. No signature. As if there were another man in New York who could order me in 6 words and make my stomach fall anyway. I dressed because my blouse still bore a bloody spot, and because defiance, I was learning, was less effective when poorly accessorized. Maria was waiting downstairs in a kitchen warm enough to feel unreal after the marble and formal silence of the rest of the house. Copper pans hung over the island. Bread cooled on racks. Coffee darkened the air. She set a plate in front of me, eggs, rosemary potatoes, thick toast, and ignored my instinctive protest. You'll need strength if you're planning to argue with him. I'm planning to leave. That requires strength too. She slid marmalade toward me. Paolo says you laughed at him. Once. He'll make a religion of it. Right on cue, Paolo burst through the side door carrying a crate of tomatoes like a martyr bearing witness. Maria, I want it noted that if these are for sauce, I support you. If they're for soup without salt, I resign. Maria didn't look up. You've threatened resignation 700 times. One day it will take. Not before lunch. He saw me, brightened, and pressed a hand to his chest. Ah. The only woman in this house who has ever laughed before knowing my tax bracket. I didn't laugh that hard. Cruel. He set down the crate and leaned toward my plate. Tell me that is butter. It is, Maria said. Paolo looked near tears. You save the good food for hostages. Earn it, then. I drive men with guns through Manhattan. What more must I do? Juggle, the kitchen door opened. Nobody announced Dante. They didn't need to. Paolo fell silent mid-breath. Maria's knife slowed once on the parsley, then resumed. I looked up too quickly and hated that I had done it. Dante wore a dark sweater instead of a suit. The effect was somehow less formal, more intimate, and therefore worse. The black rosary moved once through his fingers as he scanned the room, not checking who was present so much as confirming the world had not dared rearrange itself in his absence. Library, he said to me. I swallowed coffee that had suddenly gone too hot. I know how to read notes. So prove it. Paolo made a strangled sound into his espresso cup. Maria kicked him without looking. The library smelled like leather, cedar, and dust kept under control by money. Tall windows faced the river. Shelves climbed 2 floors. A long table stood at the center under green-shaded lamps, and on it, waiting, was a light box, cotton gloves, magnifier, distilled water, blotting paper. I stopped. What is this? Dante closed the door behind us. Enzo found out what you do. I looked at the setup again, proper materials, good ones, not improvised. I restore paper, I said carefully. You rescue the truth from damage, he said, as if reading from a file he'd disliked needing. Close enough. My pulse shifted. You looked me up. I look up to everyone who lies in my ballroom. I set my satchel down and unwrapped the page. Even after all these years, touching it felt like touching the edge of my mother's hand. My mother was a conservator at San Michele. After she died, I found this hidden in one of her cases. Cause of death. The question was clinical but not careless. Car accident, I said. Officially, I fitted on the gloves. Unofficially, men started asking my father what Alina Belandi had taken from the church before the funeral flowers died. Dante's expression did not change. That itself was an answer. I worked because my hands knew how even when the rest of me shook. Humidification chamber, gentle lift, light beneath the page, ultraviolet pass. There, faint as a bruise beneath skin, lines began to emerge under the burned shadow. Writing, crossed out entries. A second layer of names. Dante moved closer without crowding me. Near enough that I felt the cold of the outdoors still clinging to him. What am I looking at? Palimpsest. I angled the light. Original record altered later. Someone scraped ink, wrote over it, and heat fixed the lie into the fibers. Can you read the original? Some of it. My throat dried. I traced one line without touching. Property transfer. Port parcels held under the diocese before sale, and here this name was removed. Read it. I did. Vittorio Salvator. The room went still in a different way than before, larger, deeper, more dangerous. Vittorio, I knew that name. Dante's uncle, old school. Untouchable, if newspaper profiles and whispered neighborhood warnings were to be believed. Before I could look up, I felt it. Dante's control tightened, not outwardly, but like a current under black water. There's more, I said quietly. A second name surfaced lower on the page. Not removed, added, Elena Belandi. My chest constricted. My mother had signed as a witness. What does that mean? I asked. Dante did not answer immediately. Instead, for one strange suspended second, he watched my face as if deciding whether truth in my hands was safer than truth in my ears. I looked up fully then, and the distance between us narrowed into something I did not understand and could not pretend not to feel. His eyes dropped just once to my mouth, still healing, and came back to my eyes so fast I almost thought I imagined it. Almost. A sharp crack split the silence from outside. Gunfire. Dante moved before sound finished existing. One hand caught the back of my neck, the other my waist, and he drove me down behind the table so quickly my breath vanished into his shoulder. A second shot shattered glass high over the shelves. Somewhere down the corridor, men started shouting in Italian. I did not scream. I think I forgot how. Dante's body covered mine for one impossible second. Heavy, controlled, warm where everything else felt made of steel and winter. Then he was up again, gun in hand from nowhere, eyes changed. Not wilder, colder. Stay down, he said. He was already at the door when he added, without looking back, and don't touch that page, little saint. It's the only honest thing in this house. He left with the rosary clicking once against the butt of the gun. Dante Vittorio's name on the Belandi paper should have felt like strategy. Instead, all he could see was a girl in a service corridor, crying and still correcting men with her full name. And now that same girl kneeling over fire-scarred truth, with his sister's old lesson in her hands. He had spent years killing lies faster than they spread. Serafina Belandi made him want something far more dangerous, to know the whole truth before blood reached it first. After the gunfire, the house changed shape. You could feel it in the floorboards, in the speed of footsteps, in the way doors stopped being decorative and became defensive. Men passed the library carrying rifles they did not bother hiding now, and the cold beauty of the estate peeled back to show its teeth. Enzo moved me to a small chapel built into the east wing because, in his words, no one shoots first in front of saints if they want their mothers to sleep. That is not a tactical principle, I said. Italians make room for several. The chapel was narrow and old, candle wax sunk into brass holders, wood pews polished by generations of nervous hands. A cracked fresco of St. Michael watched from the apse, spear lowered toward some faded demon near the floor. Maria brought tea I didn't drink. Paolo brought a blanket and announced, if anyone asks, I volunteered heroically. If I die, mention this at the funeral. You're not dying, Enzo said. Paolo looked at the armed men outside the chapel door. Your optimism is insulting. When Enzo left to coordinate the lockdown, Paolo sat at the end of the pew across from me and lowered his voice. He put 3 men in the driveway for you. I frowned. Who? He stared. You really are innocent, Dante. Who else rearranges infrastructure as courtship? That is not courtship. No, Paolo considered. It's worse. Maria emerged from a side room carrying a tray of biscotti. Stop bothering her. I'm comforting her. With lies and theater. Both, Maria said. The chapel door opened again before Paolo could answer. Enzo stepped inside first, scanning corners out of habit, and Dante came in behind him with a streak of blood darkening the white cuff at his wrist. I stood before I meant to. It's not mine, Dante said. That should not have eased me. It did. Maria was already moving. Sit. He looked as if he might refuse on principle, then did it anyway. On the front pew, not quite facing the altar, one forearm braced on his thigh. Up close, the blood on his cuff was thinner than I thought, but there was a cut across his palm and powder blackening at his knuckles. Not his blood, maybe. I hated that I had started sorting his damage by intimacy. Paolo edged toward the door. I'm going to check the corridor and also whether fear burns calories. Stay, Dante said. Paolo froze with visible regret. Of course, nothing comforts me like danger in enclosed spaces. Maria pushed the first aid kit at me. You, hold his hand open. I looked at her. Me, you're the one staring at it. Heat rushed into my face. Paolo made a sound that deserved a slap. Enzo, to his credit, stared at the fresco. Dante turned his hand over without comment. His palm was cut where broken glass or a knife edge had kissed and kept going. I knelt because standing felt too far away, and because the chapel floor was cooler than the room, anchoring. His hand was large, warm, calloused in places that told ugly stories all on their own. The rosary hung from his other hand, black beads looped twice around his fingers, one bead tapping softly against his ring. Click! I cleaned the cut in silence. He did not flinch. That unsettled me more than pain would have. Who shot at the windows? I asked. One of my uncle's men, Dante said. Vittorio. He watched my hands while I pressed gauze to his palm. You're quick. You say that like it's a vice. In this house, it is. Maria handed me a strip of bandage. I wrapped his hand carefully. He was so still that my own pulse grew loud in compensation. Why did my mother's name matter? I asked quietly. No one moved. Even Paolo, who ordinarily looked born to interrupt a funeral, went silent. Dante's gaze shifted to the altar candle. Because Alina Belandi was with my sister the night she died. The bandage slipped in my fingers. I looked up. What? He did not repeat himself. He did not soften it. That, I was beginning to understand, was his version of honesty. My sister Lucia was 21, he said. She found documents she wasn't supposed to find. She took them to a church archive because she thought paper was safer than men. Your mother was working late. She tried to help. The chapel seemed to narrow around us. My mother never told me that. She may not have had the chance. My throat tightened hard enough to ache. Did she die because of your family? The question landed between us like a blade laid flat. Dante answered it with the worst kind of truth. Yes. Maria closed the first aid kit very softly. Paolo looked at the floor. Enzo said nothing at all. A laugh almost left me, sharp and ugly. Instead, I tied off the bandage, with fingers that had started to shake. So I'm here because your family destroyed mine. My family destroyed plenty. His voice stayed level, but one muscle jumped once at his jaw. I'm trying to determine which pieces belong to whom. I should have pulled away then. Instead, my hand stayed around his wrist one beat too long, over the hard jump of his pulse. His eyes dropped to the place where I held him. Almost. It lasted maybe half a breath, enough to make the air feel thinner. Paolo, evidently deciding we had all suffered sufficiently, cleared his throat. Not to interrupt this beautiful chapel intimacy, but Maria, if I die today, will you finally admit your meatballs were the great love of my life? Maria looked disgusted. You're not dying. And my meatballs deserve better. Enzo actually snorted. Paolo pressed a hand to his heart, mocked in my final hours. Final hours, Maria said. You cried over a bee last summer. It was inside my shirt. That was an assassination attempt. I laughed before I could stop myself. Dante looked at me then, not politely, not in passing, fully. My laugh hit him like the name had, though differently. I saw it. The faint break in composure sealed almost at once. Almost. Maria took the used gauze from my hand. Good. Now she looks alive again. I rose too fast and swayed. Dante stood at the same time, his good hand at my elbow before I hit the pew. The contact was brief, controlled. Entirely unnecessary once I caught myself. He did not remove his hand immediately. Neither did I move away. From outside came the muted thud of men running, the metallic groan of a gate being secured, the distant bark of orders in Italian. Inside the chapel, his hand was steady at my sleeve, and the smell of candle wax and gunpowder twisted into something I would remember longer than I wanted. Sit back down, he said. That wasn't a request, was it? Have you known me to make many? You invited me upstairs once. No, a pause. I summoned you. I should have bristled. Instead, I heard the roughness hidden under the word and hated myself for hearing it. When Enzo stepped outside to answer a call, Dante glanced at the chapel door, then back at me. The windows were hit because someone knew where you were. Your uncle already knows about me. Not your name. Not yet. That sounded like a threat. It sounded like time. He slid the rosary back through his fingers, click. Use it for what? To decide how honest you intend to be with me, little saint. I stared at him. That goes both ways. Something dark and almost amused touched his mouth. You're learning. He left before I could answer, taking the cold with him. The chapel door shut. My hands were still warm from his. By evening, the estate had settled into a false calm. That was worse than the lockdown. Gunmen at least admitted what they were. Calm in a mafia house was a costume. It put crystal on tables and music in hallways, and expected you not to notice the men checking the tree line through antique glass. I noticed anyway. Once you had seen a room turn dangerous, you could not quite unsee its skeleton. Maria put me to work because, according to her, frightened women either folded laundry or thought themselves sick. I chopped parsley in her kitchen, while she braised tomatoes down into a sauce that smelled like basil and heat, and childhood I had not earned. Paolo leaned against the island with a bowl of olives, reading the sodium content on a jar with the anguish of a condemned man. 40 milligrams per serving, he said. This is persecution by math. Maria flicked water at him. Then don't serve yourself 6. I'm a growing boy. You're 32. That is still growth if my spirit is involved. I snorted. The knife slipped and nicked my finger. Before I could react, Maria took my hand, wrapped it in a towel, and muttered, There, proof laughter is dangerous. Paolo peered at the towel. If Dante asks, tell him you fought bravely against spinach. The kitchen door swung open. Dante stepped in with Enzo and a man I had not met. Lean, dark-haired, elegant in a way that made me think of fountain pens and old grudges. He carried a leather portfolio and wore patience like a pressed collar. Serafina, Enzo said, this is Gianni Morello. He handles financial records. Gianni inclined his head. I've heard you can read what fire leaves behind. I read what people try to bury, I said. Something flickered in his eyes, too quick to name. Dante set a shallow archival box on the table. Then read this. Inside, wrapped in tissue, was a torn baptismal register and a faded envelope stained brown at one corner. I looked up. Lucia S., I asked. Dante's expression did not shift, but Enzo glanced once toward him, confirming everything. I dried my hands. Why show me this? Because your mother's name appears beside my sister's death, Dante said. I want to know if it appears before. I should have refused. Curiosity beat self-preservation again. We carried the box to the morning room, where the last light washed the walls honey gold, and a fire snapped in a marble hearth too white to belong near anything honest. I laid out tools from a kit Enzo had somehow sourced in 3 hours: micro spatula, thin brushes, lens, wheat starch paste, strips of Japanese tissue fine as breath. Gianni watched with folded arms. You work gently for someone so suspicious. Paper tears when rushed, I said. So do people. His smile came a fraction late. Noted, I eased the envelope open at the broken seam. Inside was a photograph curled with age. A young woman in a dark dress stood on church steps with a girl of maybe 13 beside her. The woman had my mother's mouth. The girl had Dante's eyes. Lucia, I forgot to breathe for a second. On the back in Elena Belandi's hand was a note. For L, if anything happens, the copy stays with the child. Truth first. The child. A chill slid through me. What child? No one answered. I lifted the baptismal register next. Water damage had buckled the pages, but under raking light, the ink separated enough to reveal the original entry beneath a scraped line. Not a baptism. A godparent notation added in the margin and later erased. Lucia Salvator, Elena Belandi, infant, Serafina Belandi. I sat back so abruptly the chair legs scraped the floor. The room went silent except for the fire. What is that? My voice barely sounded like mine. Dante crossed to my side before anyone else moved. He bent over the page, one hand braced on the table, the other still except for the rosary bead held tight between 2 fingers. Click. His face changed by degrees, not expression but impact. Lucia was my godmother, I whispered. Gianni made a soft sound of disbelief. Enzo swore under his breath. Maria, who had appeared unnoticed in the doorway with Paolo behind her, pressed a hand to her chest. No one looked more shattered than Dante. He did not show it the way ordinary men did. That would have required collapse. He went quieter than quiet, which somehow carried more violence inside it. My mother never told me, I said. My father never told me. Because telling you would have painted a target on your back, Dante said. It's painting one now. Yes, the honesty of that nearly undid me. I stood and walked to the hearth, because if I stayed at the table I was going to cry in front of all of them, and I had done enough of that in this house. Heat hit my knees. My reflection wavered in the fire screen, fragmented. A godmother, Lucia, the dead sister in the chapel story, my mother's hidden witness, a photograph labeled Truth First. Say something useful, I said to no one in particular. Paolo, impossibly, stepped into the silence first. Useful is not my best suit. But for what it's worth, being spiritually related to this family sounds like terrible luck, not identity. I laughed once, wet and unwilling. Dante stayed by the table. Serafina! I didn't turn. No, look at me. That sounds like an order. It is. That made me face him simply to deny him the satisfaction of gentle obedience. He met my gaze across the room, the flames between us shaking light over the planes of his face. Your mother and Lucia were trying to document property transfers Vittorio buried through church holdings, he said. When Lucia realized the transfers connected to a trafficking route through the docks, she made a copy. Elena hid it. The burned page. Yes, and the child, I asked. What did that mean? Dante's eyes dropped once to the register, then returned. It meant if they were found, Lucia wanted someone outside the family to protect the copy. I understood before he said it. Me, he inclined his head. I sank into the nearest chair because my legs had become unreliable. The room blurred at the edges, not from fear. From the terrible intimacy of being woven into a dead girl's final decision before I had even learned multiplication tables. I need air, I said. Enzo stepped forward. Dante stopped him with a look. I'll take her, Dante said. Outside, the terrace stones were cold under my thin shoes, and the river smelled metallic in the dark. I gripped the balustrade and tried to fit my life back into my own skin. Dante stopped behind me, not touching. My father told me my mother hid old paper because she was stubborn, I said. Not because she was brave. Men change words when they're afraid of them, I laughed bitterly. Is that what you do? He was silent long enough to become an answer. Then, softly, only with grief. I turned before I could think better of it. He was closer than I expected. Too close for safety, not close enough for comfort. I could see the white scar at his throat in the moonlight and the restraint in every line of him. Almost, if he had reached for me, I might have stepped back. He didn't. That made it worse. From inside, a crash sounded, glass, raised voices, Enzo barking an order. Dante's head turned sharply toward the doors. By the time I followed his gaze, he was already moving. Betrayal had entered the house. I felt it before anyone named it. The betrayal announced itself with ledgers. Of course it did. By midnight, Enzo had 3 men questioning staff in the lower hall. Maria was furious about broken crystal. And Gianni Morello had vanished from the estate with 2 archive boxes, and a car no one had authorized him to take. His office safe stood open, not emptied but disturbed, papers shifted, drives missing, one drawer hanging at a wrong angle like a dislocated limb. Not all of it, Dante said when Enzo listed the damage. Only what mattered. We were in the study, a room too dark for honesty and too elegant for panic. The lamps cast bronze pools over maps, glass front cabinets, and a portrait of some dead Salvator patriarch who looked disappointed in everyone still living. Enzo planted both hands on the desk. He had access for years. And my uncle had patience for longer, Dante replied. I stood near the hearth with Lucia's photograph in my hand, trying not to feel the awful shape of my place in this. If Gianni took the page, he didn't, Dante said. I looked up. How do you know? His gaze shifted to my satchel on the chair beside me. Because I moved it. I had not noticed him do it. That unsettled me for one reason and steadied me for another. Paolo appeared in the doorway carrying a black duffel and wearing a bulletproof vest over a shirt printed with tiny lemons. Before anyone asks, yes, this was the only clean shirt left in my room. No, I don't deserve laughter on what may be my final citrus-themed evening. Maria, behind him, closed her eyes briefly. Madonna, protect me from theatrics. From sodium and bullets both, Paolo corrected. Despite everything, the corner of Dante's mouth moved. Then his phone buzzed. He read one message, and whatever half-merciful mood the room had manufactured vanished. Gianni was seen in Red Hook, he said. Warehouse 17. Enzo straightened. Trap, yes. You're going anyway. Yes. My heart kicked hard once. Then I'm coming. Every man in the room looked at me like I had announced I planned to dive into the river wearing cutlery. No, Dante said. The page is about my mother. Lucia was my godmother. Gianni may have taken something he can't identify without me. He can identify money without you just fine. He can't identify restoration notes. I lifted my chin. I wrote my observations in code on the tissue backing. That was not entirely true. It was better. Better because it made me useful, worse because I saw immediately that it also made me bait. Dante knew it too. Absolutely not. Then stopped treating me like a vase someone left in the wrong room. His eyes hardened. A vase doesn't walk toward rifle fire on principle. No. It gets placed there by men who think breaking is cleaner than choosing. Enzo looked studiously at the map wall. Paolo mouthed oh no to Maria and received a pinch to the arm. Dante crossed the room. Not quickly. He never needed quickly to mean danger. When he stopped in front of me, I could feel the heat of him through the cold air. You think I'm keeping you out because I underestimate you, aren't you? No, his voice dropped. I'm keeping you out because I know exactly what men like my uncle do with women who know too much. That silenced me. For one painful second, I saw not power but memory behind his eyes. A door. 30 lost seconds. A sister he could not reach in time. Almost I touched his sleeve. I didn't. He took the choice from me by stepping back first. Restraint. Again, it hit harder every time. In the end, he compromised in the only language he believed in. Control. I went, but in Paolo's armored sedan, between Enzo in front and Maria's muttered prayers tucked inexplicably into my coat pocket. Dante rode separately with his men. Red Hook after 1 in the morning looked like the edge of a country no one wanted to govern. Rust, chain link, river black dark, sodium lamps trembling over puddles of oil. The warehouse stood at the end of a loading lane, one roll-up door yawning half open as if waiting to be bait itself. It was. The first shot hit the hood before the sedan fully stopped. Enzo shoved my head down. Paolo screamed a profanity so creative it deserved copyright. Glass exploded inward. The air filled with powder and safety glass grit, and the metal scream of bullets finding the wrong surface. I did not think. I grabbed Paolo's dropped phone, hit the side camera, and angled it low through the broken panel toward the warehouse entrance. Motion sensors reflected faintly in the lens 2, maybe 3, wired points at ankle height. Don't move, I snapped. Paolo stared at me. Wasn't planning a sprint, sweetheart. Trip lines, I said. Enzo swore and relayed it into his comm. Outside, Dante moved through gunfire like consequence had finally annoyed him enough to wear a body. Efficient, not furious. That was worse. 2 men went down before I even registered he had changed position. He reached the door, dropped low, signaled left. His team adjusted. Then someone came out the side passage I had not seen and fired point blank. I was out of the car before either man beside me stopped me. Serafina, I ran crouched, stupid with fear, to where Dante had fallen behind a stack of pallets. His shoulder was blood dark. He had shot the attacker on the way down. I said stay in the car, he bit out. You say many things. His laugh was rough and disbelieving and gone too fast. Little saint. I tore open the prayer packet Maria had tucked into my coat and used the clean cloth wrapped around the card to jam against his wound. He hissed once through his teeth, then went silent again, watching my face instead of the blood. "You're hit badly. Not badly enough to lose this argument." Shots cracked deeper inside. Enzo shouted. Paolo, somewhere behind us, yelled, "I am too handsome for this." My hands shook harder when I realized Dante was using his uninjured arm to shield my head from the line of fire. "Why do you keep doing that?" I whispered. "Doing what? Protecting me before yourself." His eyes held mine in the warehouse dark, iron and exhaustion, and something he would not name. "Because the first time I chose 30 seconds, my sister died." The truth landed in me like impact. Then, quieter, as if he hated the vulnerability even while giving it. "And because you cried with men's hands on you and still said your real name. Nobody in my world does that. They bargain. They perform, they lie, you didn't." There it was, named at last, the reason my throat burned. "Dante, don't." Not harsh, barely sound at all. "If you say something I can't afford to hear out here, I'll forget where we are." Almost. His hand came up, blood-marked fingers stopping just short of my cheek before lowering again. Restraint. Again, Enzo shouted clear. Gianni was dead, warehouse secured. War, however, had already started. Back at the estate, after the doctor stitched Dante's shoulder in a room smelling of antiseptic and old wood, I found him alone on the dark balcony outside the study. He stood with one hand on the stone rail, the rosary hanging loose from the other. "I should thank you," he said without turning. "You hate thanking people. I hate owing them more." Wind lifted my hair. I stepped beside him. The city glowed far off, indifferent. "I was afraid," I admitted. He looked at me then, really looked. "I know." That was when he kissed me, not because either of us moved much, because he leaned in like it cost him, and I did not step away. His mouth only brushed mine once, hesitant in a way that broke me more than hunger would have. A question, almost withdrawn before it existed. I answered by catching his sleeve with shaking fingers. When he kissed me again, deeper and still so careful, I felt every place he was stopping himself. The restraint was in it, the ache, the refusal to take what I had not yet given. I pulled back first because I was trembling too hard to hold up all that feeling. He touched his forehead to mine for one breath. "War's here." I nodded, eyes closed. Neither of us pretended that changed nothing. War made routines out of ruin. By the third day, I could identify the sound of different weapons from inside the East Hall. By the fifth, I stopped flinching every time the gate alarm groaned open. Men came and went with clipped updates, blood on cuffs, mud on shoes, apologies to Maria when they tracked dirt through her kitchen. She fed them anyway, furious and maternal in equal measure. Dante slept less than any human body should have allowed. The stitches in his shoulder pulled when he reached, so he reached with the other arm and pretended not to notice. I noticed. That was the problem with wanting something dangerous. Detail became devotion before you gave permission. He did not kiss me again. That was worse than if he had. Almost lived between us now. In doorways, in glances, in the way his hand hovered at the small of my back without landing when men crowded too near. In the way I found myself listening for the soft click of the rosary before I entered a room. Paolo noticed everything and respected none of it. "I would like it noted," he said one morning as I helped Maria pipe cream into sfogliatelle shells, "that the boss has entered his tragic monk phase. Very romantic. Very bad for office morale." Maria smacked flour onto his sleeve. "Carry the tray. I'm too emotionally delicate for pastries." "You're too loud for grief," she said. He carried the tray. The warmth of the kitchen let me forget, briefly, that men were dying because of a ledger line and a girl baptized under the wrong kind of protection. I focused on the pastry instead. Crisp shell. Orange-scented ricotta filling. Sugar dusting light enough to melt at breath. "It looks strong," Paolo said, peering over my shoulder, "but if you press too hard, it shatters." Maria glanced at me once and said nothing. I did. That's the point. By afternoon, Enzo took a bullet in the side, not because of a grand betrayal, because war was ugly and efficient and refused good narrative timing. He was moving me from the study to the safer interior hall when 2 rounds came through the west windows. One lodged in the banister. One caught him as he turned. He hit the floor hard enough to shake the runner carpet. For one horrible second, everything in me went white. Then training I didn't know I had, the practical training of restoration labs, museum accidents, panic compartmentalized into procedure took over. Pressure, elevation, keep him talking. Don't look at the amount of blood for too long, or it becomes the only fact in the room. Enzo gripped my wrist once, hard. You're getting annoyingly useful. Don't flatter me while bleeding on Persian wool. His laugh broke into a grimace. Dante arrived as the medics lifted Enzo. His face at the sight of blood on my hands did something terrible to my chest before he registered it wasn't mine. Then it became something colder. Who did this? Sniper from the trees, one guard said. Dante's jaw tightened. Find him. He turned to me, took one look at my hands, and went very still. Come with me. He brought me to the old wine cellar under the house, stone-walled and windowless, converted now into a bunker with monitors, cots, and enough weapons to destabilize small governments. He shut the heavy door behind us. The specific weight of that lock dropping into place sounded final in a way I hated. I can leave, I said suddenly. The words surprised us both. Dante stared at me. I can, I repeated, quieter. My father's cousin in Vermont still thinks I catalog parish records. Enzo can arrange it. You can make it possible. He looked at the blood on my fingers before answering. Yes, that one word hurt more than refusal would have. You'd let me go, if you asked it, I laughed, and it came out like damage. That's not what I expected. What did you expect, a locked door? A command. His voice stayed low, but anger edged it now. You said once I don't get to decide where you go. Were you only brave when you thought I'd stop you? I stared at him. That's cruel. It's honest. He had become too good at that. My father arrived before dusk under guard, driven up from the city by men who had found him packing anyway. He looked older than the last time I had seen him, smaller in the shoulders, fear worn thin into his skin. When he saw me, he held my face in both hands and whispered my full name like apology. I tried to keep you out of it. You kept me ignorant. I kept you alive. Dante gave us the study and stood outside the door, a shadow through frosted glass. My father told me the rest in pieces. Elena had helped Lucia hide proof against Vittorio. When Lucia disappeared, my mother placed the backup copy with church materials and had Serafina's godparent notation inserted in a rural parish register under old Belandi family protection. If Vittorio ever found the witness, the child's connection might force certain priests to shelter her before asking questions. It was desperate. It worked until it didn't. He knew, I asked. Not your name, my father said. Not until the gala. We changed surnames, moved, cut ties. I thought silence would finish what protection started. Instead, silence had hollowed us both. You can still come with me, he said. Tonight, before this house eats the rest of your life. The gate opened an hour later, truly opened, car waiting, papers ready. Maria packed food into a basket and pretended not to cry. Paolo hugged me with solemnity so theatrical it almost broke me. If Vermont has decent prosciutto, write me, he said into my hair. If it doesn't, never speak of it again. Enzo, pale but standing with bandages under his shirt, because stubbornness was apparently a contagious family religion here, pressed my satchel into my hand. Leaving is not cowardice. No, staying might be. Dante did not come to the front steps until I was already at the car. He stopped under the lantern light, coat open, rosary dark in one hand. The night between us smelled like wet earth and distance. No one else spoke. I walked to him because if I left from the car, I would always hate myself for the shape of that cowardice. You said yes too easily, I told him. His gaze held mine. Because if I asked you to stay while this blood was on my house, I'd become the man I've spent 10 years trying not to be. There it was. The mirror line, the fear beneath all that control. I saw you in the hallway, I whispered, when Enzo was hit. You looked at my hands first. I know, I can't unknow what you are. No, but I can't unknow what you aren't either. Something moved in his face then, barely, more devastating for how little. I put one foot in the car, then I took it back out. The choice cost me immediately. My father's hope, the clean lie of another life. The girl who thought love and danger could always be separated if she just stayed careful enough. I shut the car door myself. "I'm staying," I said. My father made a sound like grief, not anger. That hurt more. Dante did not touch me. He only bowed his head once, accepting a vow he had not asked for and therefore could not own. The gate closed behind my father's car. I walked back into the dark with open eyes. The betrayal wore a kind face. Maybe that was what made it betrayal instead of war. 2 nights after I chose to stay, Gianni's replacement records were found burned in a dockside furnace, and an informant led Enzo's men toward Brooklyn while the real move happened upstate. Dante took half the house south before dawn. Maria forced espresso on everyone with the grim resolve of a field medic. Paolo complained that fear was ruining his complexion. I almost believed the worst had already shown itself. Then Gianni Morello came through the conservatory door carrying Maria's market flowers. He looked exactly as he had in the kitchen, pressed shirt, tidy hair, careful hands. That was the obscene part. Evil should at least bother to rearrange its face. Maria turned first. "You," Gianni drew a gun. Everything after that happened too quickly for dignity and too slowly for mercy. Paolo lunged for Maria. I shoved the flower stand over on instinct. Pots shattered. Soil exploded across the tile. One of Gianni's men came in behind him through the service hall. Another already had the gardener on his knees outside. "Don't," Gianni said, sighting down the barrel at me, not Maria. "You're the only one he'll bargain correctly for." Paolo, on the floor with a bag of onions rolling into his hip, muttered. "This is officially my least favorite produce-related crisis." Even terrified, Maria nearly slapped him. I should have run deeper into the house. Instead, I grabbed the nearest thing with weight, a brass watering can, and threw it at the second man's face. He swore, staggered, fired wild into the ceiling. Plaster rained down. Paolo dragged Maria behind the overturned prep table. Gianni crossed the room and struck me hard enough to split the inside of my mouth on my teeth. Stars burst white. When they cleared, zip ties bit my wrists. They took me in a van that smelled like gasoline and old rope. I kept count of turns because panic-like tasks, left from the estate, highway, bridge. Industrial echo, down ramp, stop, roll, stop again. The hood came off in a brick room with one bare bulb and a drain in the floor I did not let myself look at too long. The walls were old enough to have stored wine once. Now they stored debt. Gianni crouched in front of me, maddeningly neat. "You should have left." I was trying not to hurt Paolo's feelings. He smiled without warmth. "You joke badly under pressure. So do you." His fingers closed around Lucia's photograph where it protruded from my satchel. He lifted it, studied the back, then looked at me with something almost pitying. "You really don't know what your mother kept from you." Then enlighten me. "Your mother didn't only witness Vittorio's transfers." He tilted the photograph. "She helped Lucia move money out of Salvator accounts before the docks could be used for girls coming through the port. Enough money to vanish records. Enough to shame bishops and captains both. Vittorio lost millions, Dante lost his sister. Those last 4 words hit with surgical cruelty. "You're lying." "Am I?" Gianni shrugged. "Lucia trusted Alina. Alina trusted the wrong sanctuary. Vittorio found the warehouse. The rest is family history." Family history. As if that phrase could dress a murder in respectability. "What do you get?" I asked. "Money, a future not owned by men who inherit thrones through grief." His voice sharpened for the first time. "Dante still thinks blood can be cleaned if the right person bleeds for it." Vittorio knows better. Families survive because someone decides survival matters more than innocence. There it was, the mirror. The creed Dante feared in himself made articulate in another man's mouth. I spat blood at Gianni's shoe. He looked down with disappointment. "That's inconvenient. Then stand farther away." He hit me again, less hard, almost businesslike. I clung to anger because fear wanted to make me float. Time passed badly in that room. A tray of water I did not drink. A call Gianni took in the corner, addressing someone only as sir. A rat scratching behind old brick, the smell of mildew climbing with the dark. I found my chance in paper. When Gianni finally tossed my satchel at the chair beside me, annoyed that the coded notes in the tissue made no sense. He forgot that I knew exactly how much damage a thin strip of sharpened bone folder could do if used at the right seam. My tool roll was still in the side pocket, not because he respected my work, because men like him only searched for metal. I worked one hand free over 23 excruciating minutes, slicing the tie by fractions behind the chair leg while pretending to shiver. When the tie gave, I kept my wrist in place and slowed my breathing. Gianni came back with his phone in hand. "He's on his way. Dante, Vittorio," he smiled. "Dante will follow." Men like him always do when a woman makes them forget the arithmetic. That angered me more than the blow had. I waited until he came close enough to retighten the restraints. Then I jammed the bone folder under his jaw. Not deep, just enough. Enough to make him rear back, swearing, hand to his neck. I drove the chair into his knees, hit the floor hard, and ran. The corridor outside was narrow, stone under my shoes, air damp and cold. Old winery, maybe, or church cellar repurposed by sinners with better budgets. I could hear shouting behind me. Ahead, a metal door glowed with daylight around the frame. Almost, I hit it with both hands. Locked, of course. The sound I made was so small I hated it. Then the first shot rang out from somewhere above, followed by another, closer, and men started screaming Dante's name like a curse. Too Late hovered over everything. I picked up a rusted pipe from the wall brackets and turned to face the corridor anyway. The first man through the corridor died before he finished taking aim. Not by me. Dante hit the stair, landing above like judgment, finally tiring of distance. One shot, then another, then the heavy body thud I was beginning to hate as a unit of measurement. Enzo came behind him, despite the bandages at his side, moving with the stubborn, efficient fury of a man personally offended by pain. Paolo, unbelievably, was at the rear in a vest 3 sizes too large and holding a flashlight like someone had given fear a practical assignment. "Down!" Enzo barked. I dropped just as Dante fired past me. Brick dust sprayed my hair. The second man crumpled against the wall. Then Dante was there. He did not ask if I was hurt first. He put both hands on my face as if confirming structure, breath, reality. Blood marked one cuff. Not mine this time, maybe not anyone he regretted. "You ran," he said. His voice was low and wrecked and furious, and under all of it, relieved enough to make my knees weak. "I didn't get far," Paolo from the corridor entrance. "Respectfully, this is a terrible reunion location." Even then, even shaking, I nearly laughed. Dante's forehead touched mine for one brief, brutal second. "Little Saint." The nickname landed differently now, less ownership, more prayer. "Gianni," I began. "He's upstairs," Enzo said. Alive for the moment. Dante's eyes changed on that word. Alive for the moment. I caught his sleeve before he turned. "No," he looked at my hand. "No what?" No disappearing into that face. My voice shook, but I kept it. "Not for him." Something raw crossed his expression so quickly I only knew it by the ache it left. He covered my hand with his over the fabric of his sleeve. "Stay with Paolo." Paolo straightened with offended dignity. "I protect with excellence and occasional whining." "You do the second constantly," Enzo muttered. They left me in a side room with crates of old bottles and damp stone walls, while the rest of the cellar above us filled with footsteps, shouting, one terrible cut-off cry. Then silence thick enough to bruise. Paolo hovered by the door, pale under his olive skin, flashlight beams shaking at the edges. "You can say it," I told him, "that I hate all of this." "Yes, I do," he swallowed. "I joke because if I stop, I'll hear the rest." I looked at him properly then, not the punchline, the man. "Why do you stay?" He gave a short, helpless laugh. "Because Maria puts rosemary in the potatoes when she knows I've had a bad day. Because Enzo taught me how to drive when I was stupid and 19. Because Dante pulled my brother out of a river 12 years ago and never mentioned it again. Pick one." I nodded. That was love too, in its own crooked language. When the silence upstairs finally broke, it was Enzo returning alone. "Clear," he said. "Boss wants her upstairs." Gianni Morello was kneeling in the main chamber with his hands zip-tied behind him, blood at his neck, where my tool had kissed him. Vittorio Salvetter stood across from him in a dark overcoat, silver at the temples, calm as old money and twice as poisonous. Two of Dante's men had him disarmed, but it changed nothing in the room. He was the kind of man who weaponized certainty. I stopped in the doorway. Vittorio's gaze found me first. "Elena's girl." I hated that he made my dead mother sound like inventory. Dante stood between us, not touching me, which somehow declared more. The rosary looped around his knuckles. Click, once, measured. "You arranged Lucia's death," I said before fear could retake my mouth. Vittorio didn't deny it. "Lucia arranged her own death by confusing decency with strategy." The room went colder. "She found children listed as cargo," I said. "Girls moved through dock holdings under church transfers." Vittorio shrugged. "And we are speaking of one root in a century of roots." Power is not preserved by sentiment. Dante's stillness became frightening. "I offered you other options," Vittorio told him, almost gently. "Years of them, but you wanted rules. You wanted to be feared and clean. There is no such kingdom." That was the mirror, not a monster. A man who had walked one step farther onto the same road and called it realism. "And Gianni?" Dante asked. "A practical man." Vittorio glanced at the younger man kneeling. He understood that names, girls, priests, paper, none of it matters next to continuity. Gianni actually smiled, blood at his teeth. I stepped forward before anyone stopped me. "You're wrong." Every male head in the room turned. Vittorio watched me with mild interest. "Am I? Yes. Because paper outlives men like you." My voice steadied as I went, perhaps because I was finally speaking in my own language. "Ink resurfaces, fibers remember pressure. Scraped lines leave scars you can read under the right light. You built your power on erasure and called it permanence. That's not strength. It's rot wearing a suit." Paolo made a strangled, reverent sound behind me. "Marry her twice." No one told him to shut up. Vittorio's gaze sharpened. "There. That mouth is why you were kept alive." Dante moved half a step, enough to block any line between us. He did not argue with his uncle. He did not speechify. He simply held out the folder Enzo had recovered from Gianni's car. Inside were the transfer copies, Lucia's second ledger, and names Vittorio had thought buried. "This goes to the bishop, the port authority, and 3 federal desks before dawn if I don't return home," Dante said. "Your era is over." Vittorio smiled sadly, almost fondly. "Then you've chosen spectacle over family." "No," Dante said. "I chose family too late once. I won't choose it wrong again." The shot that ended it came from Gianni. He had palmed a small backup pistol from his boot while everyone watched Vittorio. It fired toward me. Dante turned before sound finished. Enzo shoved me down. The bullet struck Paolo high in the shoulder instead. Time tore. Paolo hit the stone cursing Maria's name as if he had misplaced it. After that, there was only motion. Enzo on Gianni. Dante on Vittorio. My hands on Paolo's wound. Pressure, pressure. Don't think, just keep him here. Paolo grinned at me through shock and said unbelievably, "If I die, tell Maria I always respected her lasagna more than her boundaries." "You are not dying," I snapped, tears blurring everything. "And if you do, I'll kill you." He looked absurdly pleased. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me." He lived, that mattered. When the room finally stilled, Vittorio was on his knees, and Dante was looking at him like blood had become a language he hated, but still spoke better than anyone else alive. Both of us knew then that the final thing would cost him. Vittorio should have been killed in the cellar. A younger Dante would have done it. Perhaps the version of him his uncle had spent years trying to breed would have put a bullet through blood and called it discipline. Instead, Dante delivered Vittorio to a private holding site at dawn, sealed the documents to 3 outside channels, and spent 6 hours turning his own family apparatus against the men who had profited from the dock route. Vittorio responded the way men like him always did. by burning what they could not keep. The final battle came at Pier 12 under a sky the color of old steel, where Lucia had died, and my mother's truth had first become evidence instead of suspicion. It felt fitting in the cruel, symmetrical way violence often did. Containers rose like blunt monuments. Water slapped the pilings below. Wind carried diesel, salt, and the faint rot of the river. I was not supposed to be there. Dante had said as much 3 times. I went anyway because the backup copies were in my satchel, because 2 port clerks needed the original entries authenticated on site before a federal seizure could lock the books, and because I was done being moved off the board while men explained the game around me. Enzo swore when he saw me. Paolo, stitched and pale but very much alive and offended by it, whispered, "I knew liking her would ruin all our plans." Maria, who had insisted on coming only as far as the command car with broth and impossible calm, kissed my forehead and told me not to bleed on her coat. The pier had once belonged to the church on paper and Vittorio in practice. Today it belonged to consequence. Gunfire started before the clerks even opened the first crate. It was not cinematic. It was ugly, loud, and directional. Men shouted over engines. Tires screamed. Bullets sparked off steel container walls and whined into the water. Dante moved through it with his team, issuing short orders, never wasting a word. I stayed low behind a forklift with Enzo and the 2 clerks while I matched seal impressions against Lucia's copies, shouting dates over the metal thunder. "Transfer 19B is altered," I yelled. "The diocesan stamp is false. Look at the pressure ring." One clerk, wild-eyed under his helmet, looked at me like I had turned into divine intervention. "You can see that now?" "Yes, now move." The second clerk shoved the authenticated packet into the evidence case and bolted toward the federal van. A round hit the forklift mast inches above my head. Enzo dragged me flatter by the back of my coat. "You are the most exhausting civilian I've ever met." "I restore paper," I gasped. "It's not usually this cardio-intensive." A truck burst through the north gate. Everything changed. Vittorio had not come to flee. He had come to take the proof with fire if he could not take it with men. The truck bed was loaded with accelerant canisters rigged for detonation. If it reached the stacked containers, the whole pier would become a furnace. Dante saw it at the same moment I did. So did I see, horribly, what he intended before he moved. "No," I said, though he could not hear me. He ran for the truck. Dante, there were seconds in a man's life that came pre-labeled. Before, after, too late. This one came with Lucia's laugh in his head and Serafina's real name in his mouth. He reached the cab step under fire, shot the driver through the side glass, and hauled the wheel hard enough to wrench the truck's nose away from the evidence van. The first canister split loose in the bed. Fuel sprayed. 30 seconds had once cost him a sister. He would not spend them wrong again. He jumped clear as the truck slammed the pier barrier and tipped half over open water. The explosion came sideways, hot enough to erase thought for a beat. Shards of metal screamed past. One struck his side, another his thigh. Then the world returned in pieces. River, smoke, men shouting, Enzo firing, Vittorio running for the far catwalk with a backup case tucked under one arm. I found Dante on his knees against a bollard, blood at his side, trying to rise as if bodies were optional. I got there before Enzo. That felt like victory until I saw how much blood. "No," I said again, because language had narrowed. He looked up at me with a steadiness that made me angrier than panic. "The case. Let Enzo." "No." He grabbed my wrist, not hard, just enough. "Left catwalk, the backup case. If Vittorio burns that, Lucia dies twice." Everything in me split down the center. Stay with him, run for the proof, choose love, choose war, choose wrong either way. Then I saw it, the way his hand shook only after it left my wrist, the way he was asking me because he trusted what I could carry, not because he wanted to be noble. I ran. Vittorio was faster than an old man had any right to be, but arrogance slows people at the wrong time. He hit the catwalk stairs expecting obedience from the world below. He did not expect a woman in a ruined coat to swing a steel mooring hook into his knee. He went down hard with a sound more startled than pained. The case skidded. I dove. He caught my ankle. I kicked, connected with his shoulder, scrambled up with the case pressed to my chest. You think he's different from me? Vittorio spat from the steel grating. He just hides the appetite prettier. I looked down at him, at the silver hair, the expensive rage, the old certainty that everyone was only one wound away from becoming him. No, I said. He stops. That was the difference. Enzo's men reached us then. Vittorio never rose again. By the time I got back to Dante, the federal van doors were closing over the authenticated ledgers, and the pier was crawling with men who had finally decided laws existed if enough cameras pointed at them. Paolo was sitting on an overturned crate, shirt off, shoulder rebandaged, dictating to a nauseated medic exactly how brave he had been. Maria slapped him every time he embellished. Dante sat propped against the bollard, pale under the soot. When he saw the case in my arms, something in his face gave way. It's over, I told him. He let out a breath like a man setting down a coffin. It is over. He didn't lose consciousness until after he heard me say it. Recovery was not peace. It was slower and stranger than that. The papers named Vittorio's arrests, the port seizures, the diocesan inquiry, the historic corruption network that sounded almost respectable once journalists pressed it flat enough. They printed Dante's family name with fascination and disgust. They printed none of Lucia's gentleness, none of my mother's courage, none of Paolo's blood on stone. Public truth was better than buried truth, but it was still an edited thing. The estate grew quieter by degrees, no more midnight convoys, fewer men in the halls. Enzo healed badly and complained less than Paolo, which seemed physically impossible. Maria made broth for Dante and pretended not to see when I carried it upstairs instead. The first time I walked into his room without knocking, I told myself it was because his stitches still pulled at the wrong angle and someone needed to change the dressing. The second time I stopped lying. He was by the window when I came in on a rainy afternoon, shirt half-buttoned, side bandaged, rosary moving through his fingers in that old dry rhythm. Click, click. The room smelled like linen, cedar, and the medicinal clean of healing. You pace when you're in pain, I said. He looked back at me. You trespass when you're worried. Maybe, he agreed. I set the tray down. Neither of us touched it. The rain made the windows silver. Somewhere below, Paolo was arguing with a contractor about the moral collapse of low-quality stone tiles. Maria shouted his full name, which in this house functioned like thunder. Dante's mouth almost softened. Almost. You should eat, I said. You first. That's manipulative. It's effective. I took a spoonful of broth just to spite him. He watched my mouth in a way that made the rest of the room irrelevant, then looked away first. Restraint, even now, especially now. I sat on the edge of the chaise because the bed felt too intimate and standing felt dishonest. My father wrote, and he says Vermont still exists. He sounded surprised. Dante nodded once. I folded the letter in my lap. He also said if I choose this life, I have to stop telling myself I'm only visiting it. That struck, because it was true. I had spent weeks thinking in temporary verbs, staying for now, helping until, feeling despite. And are you, Dante asked. Visiting? Yes, I looked at him, at the scar at his throat. At the side wound he carried, because he had chosen consequence over clean distance. At the man who had blood on his hands and still stopped, again and again, at my edge as if my innocence were not something to consume but something to guard even from himself. No, I said. The word changed the air. He set the rosary down on the windowsill, not discarded, rested. Then he crossed to me and knelt because his side still would not let him bend quickly. The sight of a man like Dante Salvator lowering himself for anything altered something permanent in me. Serafina, he said, my full name careful in his mouth. I can offer you honesty, protection, and a life that will never be simple again. My breath caught. I can't offer clean, he continued, or ordinary. I can't promise that what I am will never disturb you. It should disturb you. His gaze held mine, unwavering. But if you stay, you will choose your place in my life, not be assigned it. Wife, if you want it, nothing smaller than truth. Tears burned before I agreed to them. That is the least romantic proposal I've ever heard. It's the only one I trust. I laughed through the tears. His hand came up, stopped just short of my cheek, then landed when I leaned into it first. That mattered. Everything between us had been built on moments like that, the almost, then the choosing. Say it again, I whispered. What? Wife. His eyes changed, warmth at last without caution hiding all of it. Wife. I covered his hand with mine. Yes, he exhaled like a man who had spent months holding back weather. Then he kissed me, and there was no hesitation in it now. No rush either. Earned warmth. The kind that knows what it survived. When I pulled him closer by the collar, he made a low sound that felt like victory and reverence at once. The door burst open. Paolo entered carrying a box of pastry samples and froze. Oh, good. Excellent, wonderful timing for me specifically. I laughed into Dante's shoulder. Dante closed his eyes once as if petitioning heaven for patience. Paolo lifted the pastry box hopefully. Maria said if no one chose wedding desserts by dinner, she'd poison me with fennel. Out, Dante said. Immediately. But before I go, for the bride's awareness, I fought bravely, got shot moderately, and deserve a seat far from my ex in case she attends. You don't have an ex, I said. Exactly. Tragic. Maria appeared behind him, took his ear between two fingers, and dragged him backward while he yelped about labor abuses. I laughed so hard I had to bury my face against Dante's neck. He held me through it, one hand at my back, the other in my hair, as if laughter were no less precious than grief in this house. When the door shut again, the quiet felt intimate instead of haunted. Dante brushed his thumb beneath my eye. Little Saint. The nickname had no edge left now, only awe, only home. Outside, rain tapped the windows. Inside, his rosary lay still on the sill for the first time since I had known him. Something almost ordinary settled around us. That was a miracle. 9 months later, the kitchen at the Hudson estate smelled like orange peel, yeast, and Sunday. Not because the world had become safe. It hadn't. Men still lowered their voices when Dante entered a room. Enzo still checked exits with the reflex of a stitched-together saint. Paolo still treated low-sodium directives like state persecution. The difference was subtler and therefore more radical. There was music now. Maria hummed while rolling dough. Paolo was teaching our son, our very loud, very opinionated 4-month-old son, how to complain properly in Italian. The baby, Matteo Luca Salvator, kicked in his basket and answered with drool. Maria declared that a good sign. Paolo claimed the child had inherited his best qualities, which made Enzo threaten to move abroad. I stood at the long wooden table dusted with flour and repaired a torn parish program for the memorial Mass Lucia, and my mother had finally been given under their true names. The paper was cheap. The fold had split under too many nervous thumbs. I mended it anyway with a narrow strip of tissue and paste so fine the seam would disappear once dry. Dante watched from the doorway. I felt him before I saw him, not by fear anymore, by the soft, dry click of black rosary beads passing through his fingers, the same sound that had opened this life. He leaned one shoulder against the frame, suit jacket off, tie loosened, our son's wool blanket somehow hanging over his forearm like evidence that power could learn softness without dissolving. Sun from the garden windows lit the scar at his throat. The house quieted around him out of instinct. Then Matteo sneezed, and everyone ignored the boss in favor of the baby. That still delighted me more than it should have. Paolo bounced the basket gently. There, a warrior's sneeze, terrifying. Maria took the spoon from his hand. Don't teach the child nonsense. It's all I have. Enzo entered from the back hall with seating cards from the church and read one, frowning. They spelled your name wrong. He handed the card to me. Mrs. Serafina Salvator, one missing syllable, one altered history. For a second the room fell away. Not because the mistake mattered greatly in itself, but because some wounds stayed nearest the surface when touched by small hands. I set down the brush. It's Serafina, I said, quietly, clearly. With a PH, And Belandi stays before Salvetor on memorial programs. No anger, no performance, just truth spoken without surrender. The kitchen went still. Dante's beads stopped. When I looked up, he was staring at me with the same stunned violence he had hidden the first night in the ballroom. Not because he had never heard the correction. Because after all this time, after blood and vows and a child and a name legally changed in half the city's files, I still did it the same way. I still did not barter with truth to make other people comfortable. He crossed the room slowly, as if not to frighten a moment already holding too much. "Give me the card," he said to Enzo. Enzo obeyed. Dante took a pen from his pocket and corrected the spelling himself in a clean, decisive hand. Then beneath Belandi Salvetor he drew a small black cross, the way old parish women marked names that had been fought for. When he gave the card back to me, our fingers touched. "You still do it," he said. I knew what he meant. "So do you," I answered, glancing at the beads in his other hand. He looked down at the rosary as if surprised to find it there. For months now, the clicking had changed meanings. It had signaled patience while I labored, prayer while Matteo burned with his first fever. Humor once, when Paolo announced he wanted to be godfather only if his suit could be tailored to flatter grief. But underneath all of that lived the old use: measure, control, armor. Dante set the rosary on the table between us. That got everyone's attention. Maria stopped kneading. Enzo looked up. Even Paolo went quiet. "I used to count what I might lose," Dante said softly, more to me than to them. "Now I count what remained." My throat closed. He lifted Matteo from the basket with that careful competence I never got tired of watching. Our son immediately seized one of the black beads in his fist and gurgled triumph. Dante laughed under his breath, still rare enough to feel like stolen silver, and instead of taking the rosary away, he let the string rest over both their hands while I steadied the baby's wrist. Same beads, same gesture, different weight entirely. I touched the cross at my neck, then the repaired program on the table. Lucia would hate the flower arrangements. "Too much baby's breath," Paolo said instantly. Maria threw flour at him. "Out! No, today I stand with truth." We laughed, even Enzo. That felt like a blessing large enough to shelter the dead. Later, after the memorial and the meal and Paolo's tearful argument with an auntie over the merits of almond cake, Dante found me alone on the back terrace, where evening laid gold over the river. I stood barefoot on cold stone, holding the corrected card in one hand. He came up behind me and draped his coat over my shoulders without a word. "You're quiet," he said. "I was thinking about my father. He left early. He still watches the gate when he visits." I leaned back into him. "Some people survive by leaving, some by staying. I still don't know if I hurt him by choosing this." Dante's arms came around me, warm and unhurried. Maybe both can be true. That was the unresolved thread, I realized. Not whether I had chosen love, whether love had justified its cost. I did not know if that question ever left entirely. Perhaps it shouldn't. He pressed a kiss to my temple. "Little saint," warm now. Entirely. No possession left in it that I had not freely answered. Below us, the gate opened for a delivery van. Inside, Maria shouted Paolo's name like an omen. Matteo cried once, then settled at the sound of Enzo's terrible lullaby. Ordinary life, the most radical thing in the story. I turned in Dante's arms and looked at the man I had chosen with open eyes. Scarred, dangerous, careful with me in ways I would feel for the rest of my life. The black rosary hung from his fingers again, but when the beads clicked this time, they sounded less like counting and more like thanks. If you had stood where I stood, knowing what his love cost and what it saved, would you have chosen him too? Or would you have taken the open gate and never looked back?